There's no place on Earth quite like it. Yellowstone National Park, 2.2 million acres of vast wilderness, peppered with vibrant geothermal pools, show-stopping geysers, and miles of boardwalks where 5 million people per year take in the beauty of nature with their families. But beyond the boardwalks, beyond the carefully curated viewpoints, gift shops, and roadside wildlife viewing spots, there's another side of Yellowstone, a wilder, more untouched side, and historically, a much darker side. Meet Yellowstone's backcountry. Over 3,000 square miles of towering peaks, raging rivers, dense forests, and frigid alpine lakes. Here, visitors with backcountry permits can be completely away from civilization, surrounded only by the grandeur of nature and the majesty of the animals that live within it. There are wide swaths of land that are 30 miles or more from the nearest road, leaving those who journey into the wilderness to fend completely for themselves against the elements, the harsh landscape, and, at times, the grizzly bears who call it home. The chances of being attacked by a grizzly bear in the developed area of Yellowstone are 1 in 59.5 million overnight visits, but the chances in the backcountry are nearly 30 times higher, at 1 in 1.7 million overnight visits. 24-year-old Brigitta Fredenhagen was tragically part of that 1 in 1.7 million. By all accounts, Brigitta was a free spirit and hard worker who embraced the backcountry with knowledge, respect, and the appropriate amount of caution, only to discover that it still wasn't enough. It was July 28, 1984, when Brigitta entered Yellowstone National Park for the very first time through this entrance with her brother Andreas and his wife. Brigitta and her brother had grown up in Basel, Switzerland. This was the home that she waved goodbye to when they embarked on their once-in-a-lifetime journey together that she had waited her whole life for. Since she was a young child, Brigitta had dreamt of leaving her home just north of the mountainous Alps to experience the vastness of the American West that she had seen on TV. And on that warm summer day in 1984, it was finally happening. The rangers who encountered Brigitta described her as bubbly, adventurous, and eager to learn everything that there was to know about Yellowstone. She was memorable and bright, which only makes what happened to her just 2 days after her arrival that much more horrific. After 2 nights of camping at Grant Village alongside Yellowstone Lake and Norris Campground, the group of 3 would make their way to this ranger station so Brigitta could get a backcountry pass to spend that brave night alone in the Wild West that she had always dreamt of. Andreas and his wife hadn't packed backcountry gear, so they decided to stay at another campsite. No one had any idea that this innocent plan to separate would eventually become one of the main contributing factors that would lead to Brigitta's tragic demise. After speaking with Ranger Gary Youngblood, Brigitta was assigned Site 5B1, just a few miles off the Pelican Valley trailhead. A beautiful trail winding through the tall forests, lush meadows, and along a creek that just so happens to be the perfect habitat for grizzlies. Brigitta was well aware of the dangers that grizzlies potentially posed, and the signs all around the trail and campsites served as a constant reminder. Ranger Youngblood later told investigators that Brigitta showed him books that she had purchased about the trails and the grizzlies, and even asked several questions to ensure that she was doing all that she needed to protect herself. In other words, Brigitta did absolutely everything right in terms of taking precautions. Brigitta, Andreas, and his wife would set off at 11 a.m. on July 30th to enjoy a 5.5-mile hike to Astringent Creek Bridge on the Astringent Creek Trail. It was there that Brigitta hugged her brother and sister-in-law for the last time. They watched as she disappeared into the thick forest of spruce, never to be seen alive again. Brigitta walked further and further into the wilderness alone. Bear bells chimed on her bag, and birds chirped in the forest canopy above her. Though she was assigned Site 5B1, the day was likely passing more quickly than she expected. After several miles of hiking alone, she came to White Lake, an isolated, beautiful body of water deep into the backcountry. There is where she discovered Site 5W1. With the sun beginning to set and no one at the campsite, she decided to settle there for the night instead of her assigned spot. The site was breathtaking, with a spruce understory and a lush meadow just to the south, overflowing with strawberries and elk thistle. Brigitta made camp at that site, her first time sleeping alone in the American West. She set up her tent, started a fire for dinner, and sat by it, enjoying the sunset on the warm summer night. And once again, she was completely isolated, alone, and miles away from anyone who could hear or help her. Following the bear safety guidelines of the time, she climbed a tree and hung her food high off the ground. Then, with night falling, she took a picture of her fire and tent, watched the embers die down, and then crawled into her tent. She then wrote in her journal before bed, reflecting on a trip of a lifetime and ending her entry with, quote, "I've taken all the necessary precautions." As she slept peacefully in her mummy bag, rain began to fall, and a thunderstorm swept over the area, blanketing the night in pitch black, lightning being the only source of natural light, illuminating the tall spruce trees in blinding flashes. It was one of those trees that Yellowstone scientists believe that a subadult male bear began to climb. Its 3 to 4 inch claws easily sliced into the bark of the tree, hauling its several hundred-pound body dozens of feet up with ease. It proceeded to tear down Brigitta's food with a simple swipe as she unknowingly slept just a few feet away. The booming thunder likely drowned the noise out as Brigitta slept peacefully. The bear devoured everything in her food bag: granola, cooked ham, dried fruit, and biscuits. The high caloric content of the food further driving its excitement. As a subadult grizzly, this bear was new to finding food, and since it was alone and without its mother's help, this discovery of filling, energizing human food was sort of like hitting the jackpot. Steve Mealy, a supervisor for Shoshone National Forest, believes that it was this food that enticed the bear to make its next move in search of more. After devouring the food and biting into Brigitta's metal cookpot, the bear lumbered towards the tent. With a single tent, no loud noises, and a source of food nearby, the bear had no reason to be cautious and nothing to fear. Using a single claw, the bear tore through the rainfly and sliced a 27-inch gash in the side of the tent near the door. All the evidence on the scene indicated that Brigitta was asleep as the bear poked his head into the tent. He sniffed the air, then, in an instant, swiftly clamped his massive jaws around Brigitta's head. With no effort whatsoever, the bear dragged her out of the tent by her head, pulling her out into the rain. Brigitta then let out a scream, still trapped in her sleeping bag, as she awakened to this horrible reality. Several feet from her tent, the sleeping bag would then fall off her body as she was dragged into the woods in the pitch black. What happened next can only be assumed by what Ranger Mark Marshall discovered on horseback on August 1st, 1984. When Brigitta hadn't met her brother and sister-in-law at the agreed-upon time, they immediately sensed that something was wrong. Unfortunately, it took rangers several hours to contact a backcountry ranger who could begin the search for Brigitta. Ranger Marshall began looking the night of the 31st, but as night fell, he saw no signs of Brigitta, and with bears roaming in the shadows nearby, he would then suspend the search until the following morning. At 7:30 a.m., Ranger Marshall began the long trek to Brigitta's expected campsite. Along the way, however, he stumbled upon Site 5W1, where an unusual scene awaited him. A sleeping bag was laid outside of the tent, almost as if it was being aired out before being packed away. The campsite was, according to the incident report, so tidy that it seemed almost uncanny. The ranger called and heard no camper in response, which is when his heart sank, because just beyond the sleeping bag were pieces of a human body, sprinkled across the ground. He discovered parts of a human lip, bits of scalp with hair still attached, and sinews of muscle tissue. Over his radio, he called for backup. It was clear that they had a bear attack on their hands. And the most dangerous scene any professional can be forced to combat is an angry bear feeding on a human carcass. More rangers would then arrive, armed with shotguns and rifles. they were tasked with the horrific job of following a trail of body parts north. Along the way, mixed in with the tissue and scalp, they would find a bloody sweatshirt torn to pieces. Horrified but determined to find Brigitta, they continued on until finally they came upon a 2 by 3 foot patch of darkened, oily grass. It appeared to have been where Brigitta bled out after she was dragged from her tent, and likely where the bear began to feed on her in earnest. 250 feet from her tent, a bit further from the likely site of her death, the group of 3 then found her lifeless body. Brigitta was lying on her stomach. Her left arm was tucked beneath her body, and her right was raised over her head. The skin on both her arms had been peeled back to the shoulder by the bear, giving it access to tear away the tissue and fat underneath. It was, undeniably, a scene straight out of a nightmare. The majority of Brigitta's body had been consumed. But perhaps the worst part is how close Brigitta was to avoiding this fate. That fateful night, a group of 3 other campers were assigned to the campsite that she ended up staying at by herself. Unfortunately, due to weather and a late start, those campers never made it to the site. Had they, it's unlikely that the bear would have attacked, as groups of 2 or more are much more of a threat to bears, who are by nature risk-averse creatures. If she had continued to her assigned campsite, she may have avoided the bear altogether. It's truly a case of the wrong place, wrong time, because according to the bear experts and the review team at Yellowstone National Park, Brigitta did absolutely everything right in terms of bear safety. Following her death, there was a review of the laws in Pelican Valley, and many of them were updated. Campsites were moved further away from known bear trails and were only assigned to groups of 4 or more. Overnight camping in the area, as far as we can tell, has since been closed, and the trails in the area are only open from sunrise to sunset. Though the attack had a big impact on the park as a whole, it was Brigitta's family who was faced with the majority of the pain from this tragic loss. Just 4 days after her brother and sister-in-law arrived for an amazing trip with her, they were instead flying back to Switzerland with her ashes. Park rangers helped Andreas call his family and tell them the news, organized their flights home, and also provided them both with medication to calm their nerves in the aftermath of the horrible tragedy. With the family flying home to heal, the rangers of the park began their hunt for the bear who killed Brigitta. Based on the length of the bite marks on her body and her cooking pot, it was determined that the bear was a 2 to 3-year-old subadult male, as previously mentioned, and the search began with baited traps. But as days turned to weeks, there were no signs of a bear matching the one that likely killed Brigitta that were found. And just a few weeks later, a preteen boy was dragged out of his campsite just a few miles away in a similar way, grabbed by his head and dragged headfirst out of the tent. Fortunately, he would manage to get away, and this being only because the bear was readjusting its bite and bit his sleeping bag instead of him, allowing him to wiggle out and run to safety. He managed to run straight to his parents, who he startled awake, making him too risky for the bear to continue to pursue. To this day, the bear that killed Brigitta has never been found, and her tragic death remains a reminder that we can take all the necessary precautions, but at the end of the day, nature is a force to be reckoned with, and she will do as she pleases. If this episode piqued your interest, then our previous episode about one of the most brutal shark attacks on record is also likely to do the same. You can find it at the end screen of this video.